We're live.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our March board meeting. It's time that we call this meeting to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, we learn, and we live. And I think now we will have the singing of our national anthem, O Canada. I'm curious to know, did we have the volume turned very low? Everyone else could hear? Some did.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but I heard nothing of O Canada. Am I the only one?
No, I didn't hear it either.
There's some comments that there were others that weren't able to hear as well.
Would you like it to be played again?
If we can do that, I would greatly appreciate that, John.
It appears there's an issue with Zoom. Not everybody is able to hear it, but some people are.
Thank you. Then we will move on. Many of you may be aware of a very tragic fire that took place in our community earlier today on Olive Avenue in Oshawa. This fire has resulted in 4 individuals unaccounted for, 5 individuals being sent to hospital, and others displaced from their homes. No words can describe the feelings that the loved ones of those affected are going through right now. Our school teams are available to provide support, and any students or families impacted by this tragedy can reach out for help by talking to a teacher, a school administrator, or through the Connect with our mental health team button on our website. On behalf of the entire Durham District School Board community, our thoughts and our deepest sympathies are with those who are directly impacted by this tragedy. We are very, very sorry. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. You have an agenda in front of you. Could I have a motion to approve that agenda? Thank you, Scott. A seconder? Thank you, Patrice. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on, we have 2 sets of minutes. One set of minutes from January 18th, the second set of minutes from February 16th. Could I have one motion to receive the first set and approve the second set? That motion, Christine Thatcher, seconded by Scott Templeton. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on. I'm curious to know if we have any community presentations. And seeing no. Thank you, Nora. Moving on to ministry memorandums, and we will ask Director Marsh to address that.
Thank you. Good evening, and through you, Chair Morton, I'll provide a brief update as well as the ministry memorandums. So in terms of the brief update, did want to brief trustees that the pandemic management occurring in our schools continues to really mark the tremendous efforts of many staff. And in particular, I have indicated to you that the protocol in terms of self-isolating if one has one symptom is an important safety measure that has been introduced throughout Durham region, but that it did have an impact in terms of staff attendance. And so since that time when I flagged for you that this new protocol would be put in place, we are definitely grateful that people are following the protocol, but wanted to let you know that on an average day, we're looking at about 140 classes that we're reassigning. And so to typically staff that aren't in classrooms. So wanted to acknowledge and express appreciation, first of all, to administrators who are managing this on a daily basis, to central staff who are supporting and also being allocated into schools without notice in terms of when there's a shortage on that day. And also wanted to identify that HR will continue to work to update the emergency list so that we can have more individuals on the emergency list. As part of the coping strategy, we're also, some teachers will be losing prep time that we normally go through a paying prep back time when they've been involved in certain activities. And so we have put a pause on that. So it certainly is showing the cooperation between all education partners in keeping classrooms and schools open during this period. And we expect, of course, as the numbers seem to be increasing in the province, that this challenge will continue to be magnified within our schools because they reflect what's happening in the larger community. So that's a little bit of an update building on what I presented to you last time we met in terms of pandemic management. In terms of ministry memorandums, one was that we received a memorandum that the Ministry of Education has successfully advocated that education workers be part of phase 2 of the immunization rollout plan from the province. We have no indication, however, when we're going to engage in phase 2 locally. The Ministry of Education has identified that they anticipate that all education workers will have the immunization will be available to all education workers and an opportunity to have been immunized by the end of June. We, of course, have been in touch with our local Durham Region Health Department. Both Associate Director Markovsky has been working with the school level management team, but I also reached out to the Chief Medical Officer of Health to find out when we can start to expect education staff to be immunized, and certainly politely advocated in terms of this important sector. They've indicated right now they are very much focused still on phase 1 and the most vulnerable individuals deemed by the province. And so there wasn't any forthcoming information in terms of when we can expect to start to see a rollout here locally in terms of education workers. So wanted to make you aware of that. And then the other memo that I wanted to bring to your attention was one from March 1st, where the Ministry of Education gave direction to district school boards that for the purposes of staffing for next year, that we should staff with the assumption that there would not necessarily be any pandemic funding like there was this year. As you know, we did increase our staffing levels based on different sources of funding. And so right now we have been directed to staff or to budget for staffing in a way similar to pre-pandemic periods. I think it's fair to say, however, that while the immunization plan will be rolling out for education workers, and that is very good news for us as a sector, that we also recognize that students won't yet be immunized, and that in fact the clinical trials for younger students are still underway. And so we're anticipating that we will have to start next year and plan for next year in such a way as to reflect parental concerns around the pandemic. And so we will be undertaking a registration process for virtual school for those families who feel that given the uncertainty of the immunization rollout for children, or whether or not they want to participate in that immunization program, that we will then get registration numbers, and so that we can plan and staff and understand what the implications are for offering virtual school, so that through the budget process, trustees have fulsome information, as well as an opportunity, should it become apparent that advocacy work needs to be done in terms of funding for virtual schools. So wanted to let you know that our plan will be that shortly putting out that registration request to elementary families and seeking for them to make a decision for next year. I also want to say that when we put that request out, when we did it last year, we planned for 3 transition points at elementary and 1 transition point at secondary. The system was incredible in terms of the work that they put into making those shifts possible. And it was also made possible because of additional funding and some flexibility in staffing as a result of that. We're going to be very clear in our message to families at this point that we are looking for a commitment for the year in terms of virtual learning, and that we will always, when there's a case-by-case situation in terms of medical needs where there's a shift that's required, work with families on a one-on-one basis, but we would not have the transition points that we provided this year. What we heard from in-person learning, families who were involved in the in-person learning, was that the disruption to the in-person classes was really did impact for them the stability of the year in an uncertain time. And so we want to be very respectful of that feedback. And it was a dominant theme of the feedback that we did receive. And the vast majority of our learners were in person and were then impacted by the shifts we had to make. So over the next month, we'll get some more information and be reporting back to you in terms of what we think it looks like, as well as providing then an opportunity from a budget setting perspective to consider what the implications might be. And so wanted to bring that information to you as early as possible, given the ministry's current memo states that we are to be looking at pre-pandemic funding potentially for planning for next year. Happy to take any questions.
Questions for Director Marsh? Trustee Barnes, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for that update, Director Marsh. I think that is, I was wondering if virtual learning was going to be a thing that we continued with. So it's good to hear that we're willing to give parents options. Are we totally set on the 1 year for rotation? Because I could see parents being hesitant to commit to that long-term piece.
I think in the absence of any funding commitment of additional staffing, we would be hesitant. We would still look potentially at a case-by-case process. But I think the disruption that occurred for in-person learning this year, every time we had to restaff the system and reorg, it really was quite dramatic. I think at this point, people know, I think, a lot more than they knew originally when we asked them last August. Granted, the unknown at this point is when their child may be immunized. But given that the clinical trials are just underway, I don't think we necessarily are anticipating that immunization is on the horizon for children.
Thank you very much. I totally understand with, we did get a lot of feedback from that from the students that were in class about maintaining those class and teachers. So I understand. Thank you very much for that update.
Thank you. Moving to Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, are we going to basically recognizing as far as not having additional monies or staffing, we're going to run it the same thing as having one elementary at home and one secondary? Because the other comments that I have received is that connectivity with their home schools was lost, even though there was an option to maybe to receive messages from the home school that wasn't necessarily taken, and there was that connectivity that was lost to the home school when things happened within the community or information from the community. So just wondering, are we going to run it the same?
Thank you for that question. So I should clarify, at secondary, as part of the course selection process, and I think we mentioned this previously through Superintendent Neville's, we did ask through the course selection process for students through the homeschool course selection to indicate whether or not they were interested in virtual learning. And at secondary, we had hoped to be able to provide it very similar to our e-learning model. It's preliminary yet, but it would appear that the interest in virtual for next year at the secondary level is very low, that most students are hoping to get back into the physical school. We are anticipating that it would be a similar schedule to what it is this year at the beginning of the year, and certainly for first semester. So the numbers are so low at secondary that unless something changes in the next little while in terms of the registration process, and they're soon going to be due at secondary, because of course building the timetable at secondary requires sort of front loading it a bit with staffing, that we would go central for secondary because the numbers are too low at any one school. So for example, 5 grade 9 students at one school, that sort of idea. At elementary, we have received tremendous feedback in terms of the sense of community that they built within the DDSB at Home virtual campus. And we'll be sharing a little bit more information about DDSB at Home virtual, I think at our next standing committee meeting. I think I have that correct. But the feedback has been very positive. We'll continue to try to link back to the community school as appropriate. But in terms of trying to run virtual schools out of the brick and mortar schools, the feeling right now is that our concern is right now we're focused when we're in that virtual DDSB at school, at home school, we're really focused on the pedagogy and the engagement of the administrators with the families in a virtual environment, and it's not an add-on. It is the primary focus of it. And so I think moving forward, we'll continue with that model, but then have the opportunities as best as possible. The commitment we made at secondary was that the students would graduate from their community school. And so we are planning, we'll be working with our secondary administrators to make sure the transfer of information and those pieces are part of it. And likewise, I know that the Associate Director Markovsky has a committee working in terms of grade 8 celebrations as well. So we will do our very best, but from a logistical point of view, DDSB at Home would be a separate virtual school.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist, you have a question.
I do. Thank you, Chair Morton. So Director Marsh, early in your presentation, you indicated, as I think is not a surprise to any of us, that the numbers going up in the province. There was a story on the weekend in the newspaper, local newspaper, might have been online, it might not have been a newspaper. It's hard to remember where you see things, but 20 students had tested positive. And I had a question about that from a parent today, and I want to ask you because I think it might be an opportune time. Do we have a sense of whether our numbers are actually potentially larger than that? So I'm not asking you for medical opinion when I say that. So I guess what I'm wondering, or what the parent was wondering, are we having a significant uptake in the numbers that are doing the asymptomatic testing in school, such that those numbers look larger, or are those all symptomatic students?
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to ask Associate Director Markovsky or Executive Officer Surjanic, one of you, to comment on the asymptomatic results. To my knowledge, the last time I checked, and we're doing it collaboratively with Durham Catholic, and we have asked the ministry to change their template because right now they reflect us as two separate lines. And because we're sharing testing sites, it's not necessarily always reflective of Durham District School Board. But the last time I checked, we didn't have any that had been identified positive through that process, but I'll turn it over to those who check it hourly.
Through you, Chair Morton, in checking the ministry listing of the asymptomatic targeted testing, as it stands right now, there have been 0 cases identified in either our schools or Durham Catholic schools, just understanding that we need to take both of them together when we look at it, because testing is taking place at both our schools and theirs, and they're being grouped based on where the testing is taking place.
Thank you. Superintendent Markovsky, did you want to add to that?
No, I think our communications officer captured that well. I know we just recently were actually in a meeting with our public health unit, and along with some information that was shared from the minister. I think provincially that statistic is about 6%, but clearly, as communication officer Surjanic has mentioned, that's not the stats that we're seeing here in Durham.
And the stats here in Durham would be?
0.
So go ahead, Rob.
The cumulative cases number of tests conducted is approximately 800. That's the cumulative number of tests conducted. We've offered testing to 89 of our school communities as of last week, Friday. And the target is by the end of the month of March to offer testing to every one of our school communities.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry,
Director,
can I
is there any-
clarify something, Chair Morton, please?
certainly, absolutely.
So that was, I think that answered my question. So my question was two parts, one of which was what kind of uptake is there to the asymptomatic testing? And so I just want to be clear. So in the time that it's been offered, 800 people have been tested, but we've offered it to 89 schools, which is a significantly bigger population. So it's quite small in terms of uptake, I think is fair to say. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford, you have a question.
Yeah, I was looking for some numbers. Did I hear the number 0 out of the testing that's done, that there's been 0 results? We haven't found any cases in the testing that's been done. I'm looking for a number like we used to get daily on who's being infected and what's the infection rate and what is the testing showing us.
I think our communications manager, Sir Janik, could answer that.
Through you, Chair Morton, in terms of the asymptomatic testing program, which is offered to anyone within a school community that does not have any symptoms of COVID-19, the number of confirmed cases is 0 from that program itself.
Thank you.
And what would the numbers be on the ones that are not, or are we only testing? The only group that we're testing is showing 0?
So I think there's two questions possibly. So first of all, I just want to clarify, we're not testing anybody. Medical professionals hired by the Ministry of Education are doing the testing, and we're providing space for that to occur and communicating with families that they're available to go. So I just want to clarify that. I think potentially the second question is about as it's increasing provincially, are we seeing increased numbers within our school?
Yes.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can speak to the total number of confirmed cases that are active right now within our schools, and that number is 59 across the district itself. And those are active cases. Those cases then get moved into the resolved category, typically after 14 days, but it may vary based on each individual case. And that information is posted on our public tracker that any member of the public would be able to view.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so I know might be a scientific question for somebody else, but is it that children of this age just simply do not get infected?
So through you, Chair Thatcher, I honestly don't feel equipped to respond to that question. We know we have some cases that students are infected, but can't speak to the number of students being infected.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Rob, is your hand still up? No, thank you. Director Marsh, I have a question going back to your planning for next year. Presently, we have approximately 30% of our elementary and secondary students who are students of Durham at Home. What are you anticipating and planning for in September? Thank
you. And sorry, Chair Morton, I may have been in a...
That's quite all right.
Sorry. Our plan is to seek information from families in terms of what their preferred model is for next year. And so we will provide them the facts as we currently know them. And the facts are that education staff will be immunized, but we don't anticipate that there will be an immunization program for their children. And so they will then have an opportunity to decide based on their experiences this year, whether or not they would choose to go into a virtual setting or go into an in-person setting. So I think very similar to the process we followed last year. However, the difference is we want to make sure that we're going into it understanding the financial implications for the budget process so that trustees have that information early. We've gained a lot of experience this year, and also recognizing that the transition points were particularly challenging for in-person families. And so wanting to provide stability to them next year, we are asking for the commitment for the year from families. I know some other boards have already closed their registration process for next year in terms of the virtual schools. And what they're seeing is similar to what we've seen thus far in secondary course selection, far less interest in virtual for next year at this time. We'll see, and we'll be sure, to make sure that parents have the information that we have as we go into the planning process.
Thank you. As a follow-up, looking at the 30% that we have this year, how many of those are secondary? How many are elementary?
I should know this because I looked at a report this morning. So, but Stephen, Superintendent Nevels, perhaps you could give the secondary number, and then Superintendent Davis would have the elementary.
So the secondary number is about 3,300 currently at DDSB at home secondary. And based on numbers as of last week, and we still have this week for students to make that choice in terms of their course selection, we're looking at about 600 students that have chosen virtual for secondary.
And elementary, thank you, by the way, Superintendent Nevels.
The elementary numbers are around 15,000 at this time.
Thank you. So looking at those numbers, it's really up in the air as to what we're going to be organizing for in September. Thank you, Director Marsh, for your ministry memorandums. You've definitely provided us with lots of information. Public question period. Do we have any questions from the public?
We do.
Was that a yes or a no?
Sorry, we do, Chair Morton. And I think we're going to turn it over to the first questioner now.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dylan Reynolds, and I live in the city of Pickering. And my first question tonight is, back on March 12th of last year, when, oh, that's my dad right there, people would know. Sorry about that. Back on March 12th, when the memo came out that all publicly funded schools in Ontario were closed, how did the board respond to that memo from March 12th until April 5th, so prior to distance learning?
So thank you for the question, Dylan, and through you, Chair Morton, I'll go ahead and respond. Appropriate question, given that we've just marked the 1-year anniversary of that information, actually. So if people may recall that we had already gone into March break by the time the announcement was launched. And so we immediately did a recall for the whole senior team from their vacation period, and the senior team returned to work. And we immediately began on a business continuity plan to facilitate really a massive shift of all staff working from home, which was the first focus. From there, we went on to look at providing what remote learning could look like. I believe there were approximately 8 communications to families during that period that you've identified, Dylan. And then on April 6th, we provided a full virtual report to trustees in terms of our activities during that period of time. So you're more than welcome to look at that on the website. It is available to you. In addition, all of the letters that we sent home are available on the website. We, during that time, launched a website on COVID-19 in terms of frequently asked questions, a dedicated page related to updates on COVID-19, and did a thought exchange with families and students in order to understand what their greatest needs were. And then we launched our well-being plan for the pandemic during that 2-week period. So it was certainly a busy and intense time. And there is, of course, all of that archived on our website for you to have a look at.
Yeah, in addition to that, like, were there, in addition to classes being canceled, were there other things that were also closed?
Thanks. So everything was shut down, and that was the complicating factor, was that we immediately had to pivot to work from home as well, because the province was in a state of emergency, was declared, and everything was shut down.
Yeah, I
you
think
have-
what made it fortunate for Durham was that we already went into our March break compared to other school boards like Toronto that went in, that gave the memo out to students to take their stuff home on the Friday.
Thank you, Dylan. And I appreciate the fact, Dylan, that you attended our board meeting in February and you're back with us in March. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I might be back maybe every month.
Then we look forward to seeing you in April as well.
Yep.
Are there any other questions from the public?
Yes, there is. So I have been, this question has been submitted in writing from Kathy Rostowski. And she indicates in her question, last week, Niagara Public Health vaccinated approximately 1,500 special education educators from both the Niagara Public and Catholic boards. None of us sitting in this meeting from the safety of our homes can deny the risk that special education staff are taking on a daily basis. Has the Durham District School Board requested that Durham Public Health vaccinate their special education staff? If not, then why not? And so I have repeated that question verbatim, recognizing that people are in different locations, but that is the question as submitted. During my update, I did indicate that we have been working with Durham Region Health Department from a staff perspective in terms of trying to find out when the education sector rollout of vaccinations would occur. Niagara, it's interesting, I spoke to their Director of Education last week on this topic because I was fascinated that they are a region that is standing out in the province in terms of being able to get 30% of their education workers are vaccinated at this point. But we don't, right now, Durham Region Health Department is focused on phase 1 still.
Thank you. Do we have another question, Director Marsh?
Those are all the questions that were submitted, Chair Morton. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. Moving on, we have a presentation, and I'm going to ask Superintendents Hamid and Lazarus to talk about the anti-oppressive practice. I open the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you, and through you, Chair. The report can be found on page 21 of your package. Culturally Responsive and Relevant Pedagogy, CRRP, is an anti-oppressive framework that asks educators to recenter learning spaces and approaches to curriculum around the intersection of identities of the students before them. This transforms the educational experience of students who have historically been marginalized by ensuring high academic expectations, cultural competence, and the demonstration of critical consciousness towards the students we serve. This requires the sharing of power in the classroom and constructing knowledge and action together with students as partners. DDSB at home secondary school teachers Tara Sarr, Jordan Bayless, and Madeline Frey have made it a priority to infuse 2S LGBTQI perspectives into their course content. In tonight's presentation, you will hear from these educators as well as students themselves and the impact that the curricular work of the play and the co-curricular work Sexuality Alliance are having on student experiences at school. Please join me in welcoming Tara, Jordan, and Madeline.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Sarr. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a grade 9 drama teacher and facilitator in our Gender and Sexuality Alliance at DDSB at Home Secondary. Thank you for welcoming us to this meeting to showcase the work of students and staff on behalf of 2S LGBTQIA+ education. In my classes this school year, we have had over 100 students participate in the play Outside by Paul Dunn, a play about homophobic bullying. Talking about gender and sexuality in the classroom has been intensely rewarding. This has created a classroom environment where students who identify as part of the community feel safe and allyship becomes the norm.
Hello, my name is Jordan Bayless. My pronouns are he and him. I teach biology, physics, and math at the high school level. I too am a facilitator for our Gender and Sexuality Alliance. In our GSA, we focus on building relationships between members and allies of the 2S LGBTQIA community. We teach the importance of identity and fostering the self-reflection and recognition of identifying or not yet identifying. Lastly, we create safe and inclusive spaces allowing discussions such as, but not limited to, the intersectionality of queer and BIPOC communities and trans women's rights. Our goal is to help others feel heard, to see representation, and to celebrate our differences.
Hello, my name is Madeline Frey. My pronouns are she and her. I teach Canadian World Studies and Environmental and Social Sciences at the high school level. And I am also a facilitator for our amazing GSA. Today, you are going to hear lived experiences from students who have taken part in the play Outside, as well as students who are members of our GSA. All of these students will touch on the importance of representation, intersectionality, and safety for the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. The resilience and bravery these students are showing is nothing but inspirational.
See, I spent an hour thinking what to say, and now I'm just forgetting everything I wrote. As an athlete and a student, I feel like it's important for me to learn about other people in a way that can help me become a good leader and a good person. Having classmates respecting and learning about each other makes a great team environment for others to be the best that they can. A huge shout out to Ms. Sarah for talking about these conversations about the 2S LGBTQIA+ community and letting me play as Daniel, the main character in our play. Without her, people like me wouldn't have become a great leader that way.
Thank you, Anath. Esther?
I grew up in both a Christian and African household in which learning about the 2S LGBTQIA+ community was quote-unquote taboo. I'm beyond glad that I got to participate in the play Outside because I believe that it's a great opportunity to make people reflect on their own biases and heteronormative beliefs, as well as how these things can severely and negatively impact the lives of so many, like the character Daniel. I know that for many of us, the door to these kinds of discussions is still yet to be opened, but our fight is definitely far from finished. Thank you.
Sophiana?
The play Outside reminded me that feelings of hopelessness, guilt, shame, frustration, anger, and sadness really does take a toll on you. The main character, Daniel, has been through it and shows that we are not alone. Others can also see how their hateful actions can really impact someone, and it is vital to remind people that even when you think a room is safe, that's not always true. This is something Ms. Sar taught me in her drama class and the virtual GSA discusses regularly. Knowing that I have to be careful with how I identify everywhere I go is pitiful, especially in a school somewhere where I'm meant to feel safe. We need these conversations in classes so that these situations can change.
Thank you, Sophiana. Sam?
Hi, my name is Sam. I go by he, they. When I was in preschool, I had a crush on my same-sex best friend. I also felt extremely uncomfortable with the gender assigned to me at my birth. Because I was never taught about anything LGBT related, I hid this my whole life up until the 7th grade. This has left me with very bad mental health issues like my anxiety. At the start of high school, I was bullied by a homophobe. I felt extremely unsafe, but when I joined the GSA, I felt a lot better. I like knowing that no matter what, I have a space where I can be myself safely.
Thank you. Brianna?
In all the other schools that I've been to, talking about sexuality and feeling comfortable in your skin was something that was never talked about in my school. When I found GSA, I met people who made me feel not alone and normal. I also met teachers who made me feel safe and valid. At my old school, they had a GSA, but sadly, it was not constructed well, and the teachers who did work in the GSA were not trained as good allies. They not only forced kids that I knew to come out, but also made me feel less safe in my own body. This can cause a lot of harm, so I want to be clear. It is important to have GSAs like this one, where teachers are empathetic, trained, and also representing strong allies and members of the community.
Thank you. Mira?
I think it's important to have students build a sense of empathy and allyship. I'm so thankful to be able to portray the character Daniel in the play Outside, as it has allowed me to step into the shoes of someone who has struggled to open up and feel safe and comfortable in a school environment due to their sexual orientation. It made me recognize just how important that classrooms incorporate two LGBTQIA communities, as there may be some students who don't feel safe or accepted. This has given me the tools to strengthen the bonds I have with my peers and friends, as they know that they have people that will support them and care for them.
Thank you. And Neha.
Hi, I'm Neha. My pronouns are she, her. I believe that talking about 2S LGBTQIA+ communities is extremely crucial, especially in school environments. Even today, topics like these are considered taboo. Thankfully, we are improving our idea of the norm in society, as well as moving past stereotypes and stigma. I feel very grateful to be part of the play Outside for these reasons. It has also brought up amazing conversations in the classroom. For instance, on Pink Shirt Day, we had a great talk about inclusivity and intersectionality that truly helped students feel more comfortable and included.
Thank you so much for listening to our incredible students. Happy to take any questions.
Do we have questions? Do we have comments for this amazing group? I see Trustee Barnes with her hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the students for coming forward. They were so articulate and shared their feelings and thoughts so well. I thank you for continuing what we believe in that making space for other voices so that lived experiences can contribute to the overall feeling of our classroom. So I just want to thank you for coming forward with that.
I also want to say to Tara, to Jordan, to Madeline, and all of your students, you've made a great, great impression on us tonight. And this is a very valuable message that we all need to hear. So thank you, and I applaud you for your efforts. Seeing no further questions, again, we thank you. Moving on. Report from the Committee of the Whole in camera, and I would go to Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The board approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole in camera and adopted the motions made at the Committee of the Whole in camera meeting as follows. The disclosure of intimate personal or financial information in respect of a member of the board or committee, an employee or prospective employee of the board, or a pupil or his or her parent or guardian. Decisions in respect of negotiations with employees of the board and litigation affecting the board. Chair Morton, this is my report.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Would you like to move that report?
Yes.
Seconded by Trustee Barnes. All in favor? Thank you. Good news from the system. We would like to hear good news, Director Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I'll just have the video speak for itself.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of DDSB students and staff, we are happy to bring you good news from across the system.
Over 600 parents, guardians, and staff attended the Parent Engagement Series event on how to talk to your children about anti-Black racism with guest speaker B. Kwame. She is a writer, speaker, social media influencer, and a DDSB parent. She discussed systematic racism, colorism, stereotypes, and shared her lived experiences as a Black woman and mother.
Pink Shirt Day was started to address bullying, homophobia, and transphobia. On February 24th, we recognized Pink Shirt Day across the district to demonstrate support and commitment to the human rights of all students and staff. Students in schools and attending online showed that they were ready and willing to stand with each other for what is right and talk about bullying, homophobia, and transphobia.
Congratulations to Nico Yima, a grade 7 student from Vincent Massey Public School. Nico is a star bocce player and was recently named the Paris Sport Junior Athlete of the Year. Great job, Nico.
DDSB is focusing on providing equitable and inclusive opportunities for all students. The Cypher Black Male Empowerment webinar series started in February for students in grades 6 to 8. Staff and students will have the opportunities to join in conversations with Black male educators and leaders in the community. Discussions will challenge anti-Black racism, where students and teachers can unpack and engage in courageous conversations.
The DDSB partnered with Lake Ridge Health Korea Community Health Center and the Durham Catholic District School Board to hold a PSA video contest for students. The goal was to promote well-being and healthy alternatives to substance use. All participants were awarded certificates for their creativity and strong messages. Special congratulations to students from Quaker Village and Robert Munch Public Schools, as well as St. Clair and Uxbridge Secondary Schools, whose videos stood out and were awarded prizes. Well done.
The psychological services and social work teams came together to work on a new resource for students and families, the Anti-Black Racism Wellbeing Toolkit. The toolkit includes definitions, suggested books, videos, podcasts, and resources within the board and the community. The Positive School Climate Department is also sharing the School Mental Health Ontario's Action Toolkit. This document provides families with tips to support positive well-being and mental health, reminding us that it's okay to reach out for help.
March is Social Work Month, and we know that our social work services team goes above and beyond to support students with their mental health and well-being throughout the year. The team encourages students and parents to seek support by reaching out through the school or through the DDSB website.
Students at Williamsburg Public School jumped into action and sent a little love to Lake Ridge Hospital patients and staff. School administrators were told how tough things were and that morale was low as patients aren't allowed visitors. Staff wanted to do something nice and put a request out to neighbors, teachers, and online classes, and the gifts came pouring in. Gifts were shared with the hospital to show how schools and the community can come together to support one another.
As students, we are excited to be part of DDSB's Ignite Learning Culture and celebrating the excellence of the system.
As you can see, the dates of significance take us to the end of April.
So Chair Morton, that
Thank you
concludes.
to Jay and Alia from Richardson Collegiate for helping with this month's good news.
So Chair Morton, that does conclude the good news from the system. And I think it does speak to the sense of community. And, you know, during this time of the pandemic, we often talk about the learning gaps, and there's been a lot of media attention focused on that. But I think one of the things that our schools are showing us consistently is that students are learning many valuable lessons in terms of sense of community, sense of compassion, and being global citizens and reaching out. So it's always so wonderful to see the good work that's happening throughout the system, and very grateful to families, educators, and staff for making that possible.
Thank you. I apologize, but my Zoom temporarily cut out. I am back. Thank you. Moving on, we have several recommended actions. The first one, I'm going to talk to David Wright about menstrual products. David, Associate Director Wright.
Good evening, everyone. The report on page 25 of your package is a follow-up to a report, is a follow-up report to a presentation made to trustees on January 4th by two very well-spoken DDSB secondary school students. The request made in the presentation was to provide menstrual products free of charge across the district in an effort to support equity among students and student well-being, and to ensure schools are safe and welcoming spaces. The presentation highlighted a program at TDSB where a third-party organization provided menstrual products to their district free of charge. Unfortunately, the program is dependent on vendor donations and is not available to DDSB at this time. That being said, our analysis points to this not having an overly significant price tag. We have reviewed purchases of menstrual products over the last number of years, and that has shown that the usage of these products is fairly limited. We're unsure if the limited use is because of the fee that we currently charge, or if it's because we don't stock the dispensers with brand name products, but our historic cost appears to be nominal, and we are confident that we can absorb the cost of menstrual products in our custodial budget without much impact. In terms of the cost of dispensers, it's a little bit more tangible. We will be able to reconfigure the dispensers we currently have to dispense without charge, but to deal with the core issues at the heart of the presentation that we received, being equitable and well-being, our senior administration feels that additional dispensers should be installed at more locations within the system, particularly in elementary school washrooms, in gender-neutral washrooms, and in certain locations within male washrooms within our schools. New dispensers cost about $326 each. Receptacles to accompany the dispensers cost about $100 each, bringing the potential budget for this up to approximately $260,000, which we will include in the upcoming budget for your consideration. That's the report. There's a recommendation in your package, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you.
Questions? And the first one would be Trustee Forbes.
Thank you. And I just want to be clear that the estimated costs of the receptacles and the dispensers, that's kind of like a one-time cost, not an ongoing program cost, which you said was relatively nominal. So this would be kind of like an upfront charge, but it wouldn't be something that would be $260,000 every year that we would have to contend with.
That is correct. It's the purchase of the dispensers and the receptacles that would be the cost. And then over time, we would have to see what the usage was and if purchase of products on an ongoing basis was a significant cost item. But it is something we're comfortable based on the information we have right now, that we can work it into our custodial budget going forward.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Moving to Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I was unfortunately not present at the standing committee when this was introduced, and I was disappointed to not be, because I had spoken with both students, Krista and Brianna, in advance of that meeting, and I thought that this was an important issue. I'm glad to see the recommendation. I was surprised at a previous meeting when we were advised that the cost would be something really unmanageable, and this seems more in line with what I understood, so I appreciate that. But I appreciate all of this more because I actually think we need to look at this access to menstrual products really as a gender equity issue. We have heard from all kinds of students in the province about this being the lack of access really being a barrier both to student attendance and achievement, and so I think it's a really important motion, and I would be happy to move the motion, and I would move it as follows. I move that the DDSB provide free of charge menstrual products for student use with a phase-in of dispensers in school washrooms, and that washrooms have free menstrual products available for students by March 2022.
Thank you. Could we have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Templeton. Further discussion? I see Trustee Stone has her hand in the air.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I see that the cost is not, it's not a great cost to the board, but I feel like we're kind of guessing on what's going on here, whether it's the cost or whether it's the type of product that we put in the dispensers. So I'm wondering if there could be a pilot project as opposed to going forward with the full force with everything until we figure out exactly what is the problem. So I don't know how you would go about doing that, but I'm just wondering if that's something that people would, the trustees would agree with, because you could change all the dispensers and give the product for free, but if the product is the problem, then what is the point? Then we have to change the product anyway. So I'm just trying to figure out what exactly is needed.
Thank you. General feeling then, do we want to move forward as a pilot project? What are your thoughts?
Point of order, though, we have a motion on the floor, so I think we should deal with that first.
Yeah, sorry, but I know there's a motion on the floor, but I did have my hand up prior to the motion be put on the floor.
A motion can be made at any time, so it should be addressed with first. If it passes or if it fails, then we can address that. That would be my thinking in terms of process.
Thank you. I did see Trustee Crawford with his hand in the air.
Well, I was just going to speak to what Trustee Stone was saying. I guess in a sense, she's asking for an amendment to the motion and to put in a trial period. If that's what she wants to do, we could do that and we could talk about it.
I'm thinking that we will consider the motion, and after that decision has been made, we then decide, is it going to be a pilot project or will it be a long-term? I have a question. We say that we're going to have this in all schools. So I'm assuming this is all elementary and all secondary schools. Am I correct?
That is correct, Chair Morton. Dispensers are currently available in all secondary schools, although not in all washrooms in all secondary schools. So we would install additional dispensers in secondary schools and in elementary schools where they're not currently present.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor, and I'm going to go back to Trustee Lundquist to repeat your motion, please. It can be found on page 26.
Certainly. I would observe, though, that as a matter of process, it is open to Trustee Stone to seek to amend the motion if she so chooses. And although I don't agree with the amendment, and I'll speak to that when we come to it, I don't think it's improper if it's done in that way. But the motion that I moved was as follows: that the DDSB provide free of charge menstrual products for student use with a phase-in of dispensers in school washrooms, and that washrooms have free menstrual products available for students by March 2022.
Thank you. Trustee Templeton seconded that motion. Trustee Stone, do you want to make an amendment to that motion?
No, go ahead with the motion as is.
Thank you. Then we will vote. And I'm going to ask that you vote using the reactions. A green check mark would indicate to me that you are in favor of the motion. So all those in favor of that motion, please indicate, please. Those who are opposed to the motion, could you use the red X? Motion is carried. Thank you. Trustee Crawford, your hand is in the air. Trustee Crawford, you've taken your hand down. Trustee Stone, would you like to speak to that?
No, that's fine. If people are good with that motion, we need to go ahead with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. We have a notice of motion regarding the naming of schools policy. This will be coming to the board in April, but I'm wondering if Associate Director Wright would like to speak very briefly. We're not going to open this up to discussion, but if you would like to speak briefly to your notice of motion, we would welcome those comments, Associate Director Wright.
Thank you very much, Chair Morton. I just highlight that we believe the version of the policy and procedure included in the package reflect the comments that were made at the standing committee meeting. And if there are any questions of clarifications, I'd be happy to answer them through you. Thank you.
And just to add, Chair Morton, we would then be looking for a trustee to provide that motion.
And that will be happening in April. Thank you. You have provided us with a very thorough notice of motion. Moving on to 12C, the report from the Standing Committee meeting of March the 1st, and I'm going to ask Trustee Thatcher, Vice Chair of the Board, to bring forward that report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The report can be found on pages 44 to 48. A resolution was passed by the Standing Committee on March 1st, 2021, in closed session on matters involving the disclosure of intimate personal or financial information in respect of a member of the board or committee, an employee or prospective employee of the board, or a pupil or his or her parent or guardian, and decisions in respect of negotiations with employees of the board. I move that the board now receive the minutes and approve the actions of March 1st, 2021 Standing Committee, including during closed session, and adopt the resolution that was passed.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. You have put forward the motion. Could we have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Barnes. All in favor? Thank you. We have a second notice of motion. This motion will also be dealt with in April. Director Marsh, did your hand go up? No?
It did not.
Thank you. This notice of motion was brought forward by Trustee Donna Edwards, and it is about establishing a standing committee of the board for policy development management. Again, we're not going to open this up for discussion, but Trustee Edwards, if you would briefly provide us with a synopsis, that would be welcome.
Basically, the notice of motion is to deal with basically making our governance committee a permanent committee to deal around policy and policy management. The background information that is there is just listing what are responses, highlighting the two areas in bold around policy and policy development. So again, it's really just to make our current governance committee a standing committee of the board, a permanent one.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. So we have much to look forward to at our April board meeting. Moving on to information items. The first one, we would turn to Superintendent Heather Monday. We're going to talk about school board teacher hiring practices. The floor is yours, Superintendent Monday.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The Ministry of Education released the PPM 165 School Board Teacher Hiring Practices on February 22nd, 2021, with an effective date of March 31st, 2021. The PPM identifies 5 components that need to be included in teacher hiring practices, including qualifications and merit, diversity, equity, and human rights, employment mobility, fairness and transparency, monitoring and evaluation. A review of our current equitable recruitment policy and a procedure aligns with the direction and components of the PPM. The DDSB hiring guidelines for occasional and permanent teacher positions can be found in Appendix E. The guidelines provide the process for teacher hiring, from posting positions to shortlisting to interviews and the actual hiring. There is specific information on proper debriefing of unsuccessful candidates, as well as information on declaring a conflict of interest. Information and training is being provided to both elementary and secondary administrators later this week. Tools and resources are being created for each part of the process to ensure consistency of practice. Information will also be shared with all occasional teachers. And the recruitment team will be a key resource to administrators as they work through this new process. The Human Resource Recruitment Department has partnered with Accountability and Assessment to develop a voluntary equity survey to capture candidate demographics. And this will provide data on all aspects of the hiring process, from application, interview to hiring. And I do have the Manager of Recruitment, Arlene Walks, and the Senior Manager of Human Resource Services, Lisa Coppins, here to assist with any questions. Thank you.
Are there questions for this threesome? Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask our staff, looking at the amendments that's come out and from the time this was written, were there any potential updates that you think we might need to do or we plan to do to this in the short term?
So in terms of the actual change to teacher hiring, there is some significant changes. There is no longer a reference to the long-term occasional list. All DDSB occasional teachers can apply to all postings that they are qualified. And when it becomes an external posting, it is also open to teachers across any qualified teacher, so external as well. And the seniority of occasional teachers is no longer a factor to determine the interview list. So those are kind of the key changes that have come from the PPM.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Thatcher, your hand is up.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. Just wanted to confirm, I expect it's a confirmation that this is available on our board website. And just to confirm also that there is going to be training, or maybe has been training to our school administrative staff, as well as anyone in HR. Just confirming those things, Superintendent Mundy.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Thatcher, I think I will let Manager Arlene Walk speak to the training that is planned.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, the training that's planned is, for elementary and secondary administrators will happen this week on March 25th. Regarding information on the website, it will be available to the administrators. So the guideline and that material will be put on an administrator site. So behind, I believe through Spark, they'll be able to access that information as well as, in addition to the presentation that I'll be presenting them this week.
Thank you.
And I believe, sorry, through you, Chair Morton, that there also will be sharing with the occasional teachers bargaining unit, and all of the occasional teachers will have a session as well to share with them the new guidelines so they understand the opportunity to applying for positions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Barnes, is your hand still up?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted a follow-up question in regards to recruitment. If that's okay, Chair.
Absolutely.
So I'm assuming, but I think, so everything comes through like a centralized point, and then it's sent out to whichever schools are hiring?
It's a little different. We do use a specific platform, but once again, I'm going to defer to Arlene, and she can speak to the process a bit clearer than I can.
Okay. And through you, Chair. So we don't have centralized hiring, Trustee Barnes. The postings that go out are through the school, but my team, the recruitment team, does manage. Once they've hired, we do review how they've hired. So there is a HR lens on the hiring, that they are hiring per qualifications and who they're hiring, to make sure that is in line with any guidelines that we have in place. And again, with the training that will happen this week, we will also reiterate that with the administrators, that HR will be reviewing the hires that are submitted before we actually process them. Especially now that postings will be open to external candidates, we want to make sure all due diligence is done before any hires come onto the board.
If I may, I'm just going to add a little bit to that process, which Superintendent Mundy did talk briefly about, but just to make sure it's very clear. The other change is we will be asking candidates to potentially, should they choose to self-identify in terms of identity, and then track proportionately then success in job placements. So that's good feedback for us in terms of examining our processes and procedures and how they're being implemented.
And
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to double check because Regulation 274 came in to address nepotism. So I just want to make sure that now that we haven't really found this perfect solution, but at least we do have some checks and balances in regards to keeping an eye on that concern. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm looking at shortlisting candidates for selection process, and the statement reads, when applicants have demonstrated their ability to meet the mandatory requirements, principals are asked to consider the candidate's lived experience as a valuable asset. I applaud you for including that lived experience. It is extremely important. So thank you kindly for doing that. Are there other questions or comments? Seeing none, Arlene and Lisa, thank you for joining us. Superintendent Monday, thank you for bringing forth this work. And it is a lot of work. Thank you.
thank you.
Moving on, quarterly construction, and I would turn to Associate Director Wright.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Christine Esquivel, our Chief Facilities Officer, who will speak to this report. Thanks.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, the report can be found on page 88 of tonight's agenda. And it is our usual quarterly report that just gives you the progress on our current construction and major projects. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Are there questions or comments for Christine Esquivel? Christine, you probably know the question that I'm going to ask, and you're smiling, so I know you know, and David probably knows as well. So I'm looking at the Beaverton Thora rebuild, and it says the last inquiry into the status of the approval was November the 19th, 2020. Because if we don't get that approval within the next few weeks, we're going to be putting that opening off. So right now we are to be opening in 22. Should we be going back to the province seeking this approval again?
Thank you, Chair, and through you, we will be reaching out again shortly back to the ministry staff because a period of time has lapsed. So we will be reaching out to them because definitely we are going to be approaching that critical period of time where we will have to have a delay, but we're not there yet. So we will continue to reach out.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments or questions, thank you, Christine Esquivel, for joining us. Thank you, Associate Director Wright, for providing us with this report. Moving on, I'm going to go to Trustee Edwards and learn about the SEAC.
The report from SEAC January 21st meeting can be found starting on pages 95, and that's my report.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. We will then turn to Trustee Barnes and ask her if we have an OPSPA report.
Thank you. Yes, I do. So just some items to note that March 24th will be our budget, our Ontario budget will be presented. So we are keeping an eye on that to see what our grants for student needs are going to look like. OPSPA is still advocating in regards to changes that we'd like to see in that format. We have, trustees might have heard, Manitoba has gotten rid of school boards and are planning to get rid of school boards and trustees. So there is a lot of advocacy around that change in that legislation that's come through. There was a bill 251, which was about combating human trafficking. So ALPSPA has put out a support for the provincial strategy that aims to increase awareness around human trafficking and the dangers that it poses to young people, their families and communities. And we recognize that human trafficking can happen in any community and anyone can be the victim. And unfortunately right now, the average age of the victims are 13 years old, which are elementary school students. there is still the OPSPA speaker series that are ongoing. Our upcoming speaker series is Planning in a Time of Crisis with Teresa Macbeth. This session will be on March 25th. And I also wanted to thank trustees that responded to the Future of Education worksheet. Responses were shared with a provincial work group, and they're putting together a paper to present it to the Ministry of Education in along the lines of what have worked for boards, and hopefully that's things that we can implement going forward when we go back to continuous learning in class or online, whichever that is. And OPSPA is now going through a process of hiring an equity auditor to review the organization's policies and procedures, how they align with the commitment to equity and inclusion. That is my report, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. And if there were any questions for OPSPA, Trustee Barnes or Trustee Thatcher would gladly answer them. Seeing none, I go back to my agenda. I see no correspondence. I see no other business. Would anyone object if we adjourned? Then consider this meeting adjourned. Have a good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.